Imagine escaping from the most secure prison in America, and not just escaping, disappearing completely. Because in 1962, three prisoners broke out of Alcatraz, a prison surrounded by freezing water, powerful currents, and guarded by some of the toughest security in the country. The FBI spent years trying to figure out what happened, but more than 60 years later, nobody knows for sure if they survived. This is the story of the greatest prison escape in American history. Now, before we get into this escape, you need to understand why this is such a big deal. Alcatraz wasn't just another normal prison. It sat on a small island in the middle of San Francisco Bay. The water surrounding it was freezing cold and the currents were extremely strong, and the distance to shore was farther than most people thought. Even prison officials believed that if anyone tried to escape Alcatraz, the bay itself would kill them long before they even reached land. That's why Alcatraz became home to some of America's most dangerous criminals. Even gangsters like Al Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly spent time there. The entire prison was built around only one idea: nobody gets out, and for years that seemed true, until three inmates decided to try something nobody thought was ever possible. Now, the mastermind behind all of this was a criminal named Frank Morris. Morris was incredibly intelligent and had escaped from prisons before. Then there were brothers John and Clarence Anglin. The Anglin brothers grew up around water and were known to be very strong swimmers. Together, the three men started planning something unbelievable. They weren't thinking about escaping next week, they were planning months ahead. And what they came up with was honestly genius. Now, while serving their sentences in Alcatraz, the prisoners noticed that the concrete around the ventilation openings in their cell had become weaker over time. So, using homemade tools made from stolen spoons and scraps of metal, they slowly chipped away at the walls. And not in a few days, for months. Every day they dug a little more. Now, to cover the noise, they worked while music played during recreation periods. Little by little, the hole became large enough to crawl through. Behind the cells was an unused utility corridor that the guards rarely checked. This became their secret workspace, and that's where things got even crazier, because they knew that escaping the cells wasn't enough. They had to fool the guards as well, so in order to do that, they created fake heads, using soap, toilet paper, paint, and real hair collected from the prison barbershop. All of this was needed for them to make realistic looking dummy heads. Now, every night they would place these heads on their pillows, so from a distance it would look like they're asleep. Meanwhile, they were working on the next stage of the escape, a raft, not a boat. A homemade raft built from more than 50 stolen raincoats, so if this thing failed, they knew they were dead. Now, on June 11th, 1962, everything came down to just one night. The fake heads were placed in the beds, and the prisoners climbed through the holes they spent months digging. They crawled through the utility corridor, then they climbed through the prison structure and made their way onto the roof. Now, think about that for a second. Three inmates were literally walking across the roof of Alcatraz while the guards believed these guys were just sleeping in their cells. So from there, they climbed down to the shoreline, they inflated their homemade raft, and pushed off into the darkness. That was the last time anyone could say for certain where they were. The next morning, the guards discovered the fake heads. At first, they thought the prisoners were still asleep. Then one guard came up, slowly touched the head, and it rolled onto the floor. The prison immediately went into lockdown, and the largest manhunt in Alcatraz history had begun. The next day, the FBI launched a massive investigation. Helicopters were searching, boats were searching, and also team divers were searching. However, days later, investigators found pieces of the raft and few personal belongings floating in the bay. Now, to many officials, this seemed like proof that the men had drowned, case closed. Except not everyone agreed. Some people believed the evidence actually suggested the opposite. There were reports of a boat seen in that area that night. And family members later claimed they received mysterious messages and signs that the Anglin brothers were still alive. Now, over the years, there were alleged sightings from different countries. Some people even believe photographs surfaced showing the two escapees decades later. The problem was that none of this could be proven, which is exactly why this mystery refuses to die. This is where this story gets very interesting. Many experts argued that the men never even stood a chance, that the water was cold enough to cause hypothermia, the currents were very dangerous, and they were attempting the crossing at night, which made it worse. But others point out something very important. The Anglin brothers spent much of their lives around water. They weren't your average Joe swimmers, and modern studies have shown under the right conditions, reaching shore from Alcatraz is actually possible. So what's the truth here? Did they drown in San Francisco Bay, or did they pull off one of the most incredible escapes in history? At this point, nobody can really say for sure, and that's what makes this story so fascinating. Even 6 decades later, the Alcatraz escape remains officially unsolved. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin were never found. No bodies were ever recovered, and no arrests were ever made. And no one can say with pure certainty what happened after that raft disappeared into the darkness that night. Maybe they drowned, maybe they survived and started a new life somewhere else. Whatever happened, one thing is for sure certain. 3 prisoners escaped the most secure prison in America, and they may have gotten away with it. If you enjoyed watching this story, please make sure to like and subscribe for more unsolved mysteries, strange disappearances, and true stories that still puzzle people today. I'm Hummus Be Cool. Thanks for watching.